If you drink seltzer water, I'm scared of you. So today I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite snakes, the garter snake. I currently have one pet garter snake, but in the future I might get more. So these are super common snakes. You see them in your backyard or pretty much anywhere in the United States and all across the world. Today I'm going to be talking about why garter snakes are awesome, how to care for them, and some fun facts. These are super beautiful animals. They're super active. They eat a varied diet. They don't eat just frozen thawed rodents, and they're just super cool overall. So when it comes to enclosure size, this is when it gets a little bit weird. So if you're just keeping a single male garter snake, for example, so for a little while you might be able to keep a single male garter snake in a 20-gallon enclosure, but very soon you'll want to up that to at least a 40-gallon. And if you're keeping multiple garter snakes, you want to put it in at least a 40-gallon, but preferably a 60-gallon. So I don't recommend keeping multiple snakes in the same enclosure, but with garter snakes that's a little bit different. Some research has shown that garter snakes can actually benefit from being around other garter snakes. So cohabiting is something that's becoming more and more popular with garter snakes. Now with other snakes, such as a king snake, you don't want to do this because they actually eat other king snakes. You'll also want to check into whether or not you can keep certain species of garter snakes with other species of garter snakes, and whether or not you want to have a male and a female, because obviously you can end up with babies. So just make sure you do as much research as you can so that your snake is happy and you're happy. I've said it before in past videos, but I usually make sure that my snake has at least enough room to completely stretch out in its enclosure. So if I have a 20-gallon enclosure, for example, I want the snake to be able to completely be able to stretch out across the length of the enclosure. Not the length and the width of the enclosure combined, but the length. Some people will tell you that the length and the width of the enclosure combined should be around how long your snake is, but I don't stick to that rule. Now when it comes to the actual temperature that you want to have in this enclosure, I would say room temperature is okay for one side, and the other side of the enclosure needs to be around 90 degrees, with a hot spot of around 95. Now in my enclosure, the ambient temperature on one side is around 85, and the other side is around 75. But on the warm side, I do have a hot spot of around 92 or 93. Now a good way of keeping track of this is by getting one of these temperature guns. These are only about $20. You can get these at Walmart or on Amazon, and they're very, very useful. Now when it comes to lighting at night, I just wouldn't use any lighting at all. Just keep it completely dark. Some people like to use these red bulbs or the blue bulbs or purple, whatever they are, but I definitely don't recommend using these at all. I would use very little to no light during the night. Now when it comes to feeding for these snakes, this is where it gets super cool. So garter snakes don't just eat frozen rodents like a lot of other snakes do whenever you keep them as pets. Now there is a list of different kinds of fish that you can feed your garter snake that isn't harmful to your garter snake, and there's also a list of types of fish that could possibly be harmful to your garter snake. So I'll list that below. So if you do feed just frozen thawed rodents to your garter snake, you want to feed them around once a week. Now when a lot of people talk about feeding garter snakes, they say it's every 2 or 3 days, because usually they're talking about when you're feeding them fish or worms or something else. Fish and worms aren't exactly a complete diet for your snake, so you're not going to be able to feed them fish and worms just once a week. If you're feeding your snake only fish and or worms, you probably want to feed it around 2 to 3 times a week. But if you're feeding just rodents, around once a week is fine. Now if you feed your snake out of its enclosure, you shouldn't have any issues. But if you're feeding the snake inside of the enclosure, you might want to lay down a paper towel or something wherever the food is going to be, so you don't get too much dirt and other things inside your snake's mouth. Usually most of this stuff is passable, but I just like to be on the safe side. Garter snakes can be fed worms, tilapia, rodents, feeder guppies, and a variety of different meals. You just want to make sure if you feed your garter snake only worms and tilapia or something like that, it isn't complete nutrition like it would be with a rodent, so you might want to dust it with a little bit of a multivitamin and calcium supplement. Now when it comes to what size of a prey item you want to feed your snake, If you're feeding frozen thawed rodents, you want to feed your snake somewhere around 1 to 1.5 times the widest point of the snake's body. If you're feeding worms or tilapia, for example, you might want to actually chop up the worms, and of course you'll want to chop up the tilapia. I've seen people feed full worms to a snake before, I just don't personally do it. And if you don't already know this, whenever you defrost your rodents, of course you want to keep them frozen, and then whenever it's time to feed your animal, you will defrost the rodent either by leaving it in the fridge or by putting it in a Ziploc bag or some kind of a container and putting it in some cold water. Once it's defrosted, you can warm it up and then feed it to your animal. Just make sure that it's not too cold or too hot for the snake. Now when it comes to water, you want to make sure that you have a water dish that is at least big enough for the snake to completely curl itself up in. You can put feeder guppies and different kinds of little fish inside of the water bowl and watch your snake swim around and find them, which is awesome. Whenever you do put water in your enclosure, you want to make sure that it's probably away from the heat source so it doesn't evaporate as fast. You also want to make sure you use some of this water conditioner if you're using the tap water from your house. This eliminates anything that might be bad for your snake. And usually you only use a drop of this depending on what kind you get. This is the brand that I use, and you never need more than a drop. When it comes to humidity, these snakes are found around water a lot of the times, so they're either in the water or in an area with a little bit of higher humidity. So I would say anywhere from 30 to 60% humidity is good. I try to spray down my garter snake's tank once a day. I don't do that with all of my snakes, mostly just ball pythons and snakes that need a little bit more humidity. But around 30 to 60% should be fine as long as they have a big water dish and they're being fed properly. So for hides, these are super active animals, so they don't always use the hides, but at least once a day I see my garter snake hiding in one of the hides. So you want to make sure you have a hide on the warm end. You want to make sure you also have a hide on the cool end. And I also keep something in the back that's kind of in between. So something else you want to consider whenever you keep a garter snake is the cleaning. I try to spot clean actually about every day. Since these snakes do eat more often than other snakes, you'll probably have to clean out the enclosure more often. I check my garter snake's enclosure at least once every day, and then I do a full cleaning of it, I would say at least once a month. Like I said, since they have a varied diet and they eat more like 2 or 3 times a week rather than 1 time a week, they will make more of a mess. Now when it comes to the actual cleaning, you can spot clean every day, but when you do a deep clean, you'll want to remove all of the substrate and everything in the tank, including the snake, obviously. You'll want to spray down the tank with some kind of an antibacterial cleaner, such as this one. You'll want to let that cleaner set for about 5-10 minutes and then wipe it out. Rinse out the tank with just some water. Wipe out that water and let it dry. And then you can reintroduce new substrate, all of the hides and everything you had inside of the enclosure, and then your snake. You just want to make sure that your enclosure is completely dry before you reintroduce everything. Now when it comes to availability, this is where it gets kind of weird because you can find many breeders that carry garter snakes, but it's not the most easy snake to get a hold of, which is weird because they're one of the most common snakes in the wild. Now when it comes to handleability, these aren't the most handleable snakes. They are super active whenever they're in their enclosure, and they're also active whenever you try holding them. They're just constantly trying to move around, so they aren't the most handleable snake. Now, they do get better as they get older and the more you work with them, but I would say these definitely aren't the most handleable snakes. But they're super cool. Now when it comes to substrate, I guess you could use aspen, but aspen is more of a dry bedding. So I like to use a blend of eco-earth mixed in with something else, or just the eco-earth itself. These snakes don't burrow a whole lot. I've seen mine try to burrow once or twice, but for the most part they're just above the substrate, which is another reason why I don't really use a heat mat. So if you like this video, please subscribe. Please comment below if you have any questions and I'll make sure to answer them. Please like this video and I'll see you next time.